sudden death after attempts to save his life failed.
Elvis Presley, a name everyone knows. But do we really know the man behind the legend?
The obscenity and vulgarity of this rock and roll music is obviously amused by.
The king of rock and roll was a walking contradiction. A small-town boy who conquered the world, yet got swallowed by his own fame. He inspired millions, but sparked outrage. He broke boundaries, but left others in his shadow. Elvis's life was wild, messy, and packed with highs and lows that would make you question everything you thought you knew about him. Was he a revolutionary, a thief, a hero, or something else entirely? From poverty in Tupelo to the birth of a legend. Tupelo, Mississippi, is not the sort of place you'd expect to produce a legend. In the early 20th century, it was little more than a sleepy southern town with dusty roads and modest homes scattered across its countryside. But on January 8, 1935, in a tiny two-room house, a boy was born who would eventually reshape the music world forever. Elvis Aaron Presley entered the world under circumstances that were anything but glamorous. His parents, Vernon and Gladys Presley, were dirt poor, scraping by as best they could in the heart of the Great Depression. To make matters even more tragic, Elvis wasn't supposed to grow up alone. He was born a twin, but his brother, Jesse Garon Presley, was stillborn. Some biographers have suggested that this loss marked Elvis's life with a sense of destiny, or maybe even a need to fill the void left by his brother. His mother, Gladys, adored him and often treated him like he was her entire world. But his father, Vernon, though well-meaning, didn't exactly exude stability. Vernon struggled to hold down jobs, and at one point, he even ended up in prison for forging a check. As a result, the Presleys moved from one rented house to another, living hand-to-mouth in Tupelo's poorest neighborhoods. Despite these hardships, the Presleys were a tight-knit family, and it was within this modest upbringing that Elvis's deep connection to gospel music began. Every Sunday, the family would attend the Assembly of God Church, where Elvis soaked in the powerful, emotional performances of the choir. If you want to pinpoint the spark that lit the fire of his musical career, this is where it all began, barefoot and wide-eyed in a church pew. Gospel wasn't just music to Elvis. It was a lifeline, a thread of hope woven into an otherwise grim reality. But Elvis wasn't just a church boy with a good ear for melody. Even as a child, he had a flair for the dramatic. Neighbors often recalled how he would strum a broomstick as if it were a guitar, pretending to be a big star. Little did they know, he wouldn't need to pretend for long. When Elvis turned 10, he entered a local talent contest and sang a haunting rendition of Old Shep, a ballad about a loyal dog. He didn't win first place, but he made an impression. And more importantly, he realized he loved performing. That small-town talent show may not have been Madison Square Garden, but it planted the first seed of his future stardom. Elvis's life took a small but significant turn when he was 11. For his birthday, Gladys bought him a guitar from Tupelo hardware store. Now let's be clear, Elvis didn't take to the guitar like a prodigy who wakes up one day and writes symphonies. Nope, his first attempts were clunky and awkward, but he stuck with it. He started learning basic chords and practicing wherever he could, often at the encouragement of his Uncle Vester. Soon, Elvis began blending the gospel melodies from church with the rhythm and blues he heard on local radio stations, as well as the country music that was everywhere in the South. What he didn't realize at the time was that he was creating a musical stew that would eventually redefine popular music. The Presleys' lives took another dramatic turn when they moved to Memphis, Tennessee, in 1948. By then, Elvis was a teenager, a shy, awkward kid who stuck out like a sore thumb in his new school. His southern drawl and unconventional style, which included slicked-back hair and brightly colored clothing, made him the target of bullies. But Elvis didn't back down. Instead, he doubled down on his individuality. He embraced his outsider status, cultivating the beginnings of the cool, rebellious image that would later become his trademark. Memphis, however, was more than just a fresh start. It was a musical gold mine. The city was a melting pot of musical styles: blues, gospel, country, and rhythm and blues all collided in its smoky clubs and street corners. Elvis spent hours wandering Beale Street, soaking in the raw energy of performances by African-American musicians who played with a soulfulness that was as electrifying as it was transformative. At the same time, he honed his guitar skills and continued experimenting with his unique blend of musical influences. And then there was Sun Records. Oh, Sun Records, a tiny, unassuming recording studio that would soon become the birthplace of rock and roll. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. By the time Elvis walked through its doors, he had already been honing his craft, singing at small events and parties, and dreaming of something bigger, something much bigger. How does a dirt-poor boy from Tupelo with a second-hand guitar and a dream become a global icon? Now that's where the story really starts to heat up. The rise to stardom, from Sun studio sessions to national fame. It's 1953, and Elvis Presley is a scrawny 19-year-old kid with big dreams and a head full of music. He's living in Memphis, driving a truck for Crown Electric Company, and just barely scraping by. But he has a secret weapon, a voice unlike anything the world has ever heard. And so, with a few bucks in his pocket and hope in his heart, Elvis walks into Sun Records on a hot summer day in July. His goal? To record a couple of songs as a gift for his mother. What actually happens? History. Sun Records wasn't a big, fancy studio. It was a scrappy little operation run by Sam Phillips, a man who believed deeply in the power of music to bring people together. Phillips didn't think much of Elvis at first. Sure, he could sing, but so could a lot of people. It wasn't until a year later, in 1954, when Elvis returned to the studio, that magic struck. One night, during a casual jam session with guitarist Scotty Moore and bassist Bill Black, Elvis started goofing around with a blues tune called "That's All Right." Something clicked. The energy was raw, electrifying, and completely new. Phillips had never heard anything like it, and he knew he had something special on his hands. "That's All Right" hit local radio stations, and almost immediately people started calling in, asking, "Who's that singing?" The response was overwhelming. Fans couldn't figure out if Elvis was black or white, and honestly, it didn't matter. He sounded like no one else, his voice a thrilling blend of gospel soul, country twang, and blues grit. His first live performance in Memphis that summer only fanned the flames. Elvis didn't just sing, he moved, swaying his hips and tapping into a raw energy that left audiences mesmerized. By the end of 1954, Elvis was performing regularly and beginning to draw crowds. The following year, he signed with Colonel Tom Parker, a shrewd, somewhat shady manager who was as ambitious as Elvis was talented. Parker was no saint, but he was a mastermind at promotion. He secured a deal with RCA Records, a major label that gave Elvis the platform to launch his first nationwide hit, Heartbreak Hotel. The song was moody, sultry, and completely magnetic, rocketing to #1 on the charts in 1956. It wasn't just the music that turned Elvis into a star, it was the whole package. His looks, sharp jawline, piercing eyes, and that slick pompadour were swoon-worthy, especially to teenage girls who flooded his concerts with shrieks and tears. His performances were electric, blending boyish charm with a rebellious edge that drove parents nuts and left fans addicted. And then there was television. In 1956, Elvis appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show, a program watched by millions of Americans. Dressed in a shiny suit and clutching his guitar, Elvis delivered a performance that sent shockwaves through living rooms across the country. The cameras famously refused to show his gyrating hips, deemed too scandalous for family audiences, but that only added to his mystique. Elvis wasn't just a singer anymore, he was a phenomenon. He embodied a new kind of cool, a mix of swagger and vulnerability that resonated with a generation eager to break free from conformity. Elvis didn't just top the charts, he was the charts. By the end of the decade, he had more #1 hits than anyone else and had already cemented himself as the king of rock and roll. But how do you stay the king when the whole world is watching? the king of rock and roll. By the late 1950s, Elvis wasn't just a musician, he was a cultural force. Teenagers idolized him, parents worried about him, and critics couldn't stop talking about him. But one thing was certain: Elvis was shaping the wave of rock and roll. What made Elvis so groundbreaking? It wasn't just his voice, although that deep, velvety croon could shift effortlessly between tender ballads and heart-pounding rockers. It wasn't just his looks, though let's be real, those smoldering eyes and infamous hip shakes didn't hurt. No, what set Elvis apart was how he blended the sounds of America in a way no one else had dared to. He took the gospel of his childhood, the blues he soaked up on Beale Street, and the country tunes of his southern roots, and he smashed them together to create something entirely new. It was music that defied labels, crossed boundaries, and spoke directly to the restless energy of a post-war generation. Of course, not everyone was thrilled. Elvis's music and stage presence stirred up more than just teenage hearts. It stirred up controversy. Conservative critics accused him of corrupting the youth with his suggestive dance moves and rebellious image. Churches labeled his music the devil's work, and some radio stations outright banned his songs. But for every outraged parent, there were 10 kids begging for tickets to his next show. Elvis didn't just make music, he made a statement. He was loud, he was different, and he didn't care what anyone thought. At the same time, Elvis was rapidly expanding his empire. He starred in his first film, Love Me Tender, in 1956, which showcased his acting chops and solidified his status as a bona fide Hollywood star. Though critics panned the film, fans loved it, and the accompanying soundtrack soared up the charts. It was the beginning of a long and sometimes questionable career in movies that would dominate much of his professional life. But even as Elvis conquered the charts and the box office, he faced increasing pressure. The sheer pace of his success was relentless, and everyone, from his fans to his manager, expected him to keep topping himself. Every performance had to be bigger, every song catchier, every appearance more dazzling. He was no longer just a musician, he was a brand, a symbol of an era that was as exhilarating as it was exhausting. Elvis handled it all with the kind of cool confidence you'd expect from the king of rock and roll, but cracks were beginning to show. Fame was thrilling, but it was also isolating. Behind the glamour, Elvis struggled with the weight of his image. Could he keep delivering the hits? Could he keep reinventing himself without losing the magic? Could he stay the king? And just as Elvis was grappling with these questions, the world threw him a curveball: military service. That's right. In 1958, at the peak of his fame, Elvis traded in his guitar for a uniform and reported for duty. It was a move that shocked fans and threatened to derail his career. So how did the king of rock and roll survive 2 years in the army, and what happened when he came back? Hollywood dreams and musical evolution. For a global superstar at the height of his fame, being drafted into the U.S. Army in 1958 was a seismic shift. Elvis Presley, known for his rebellious image and electrifying performances, traded in his glittering stage outfits for a military uniform and a standard-issue haircut. It was a moment that could have derailed his meteoric career. Instead, Elvis used his time in the army to redefine himself, proving that he wasn't just a rock and roll sensation, but also a man willing to serve his country like any other young American. Stationed in Germany, Elvis immersed himself in military life, earning the respect of his peers and superiors for his work ethic and discipline. While he lived off base in a rented home, his daily routine mirrored that of his fellow soldiers. He pulled guard duty, drove military vehicles, and even managed to keep up with his rigorous physical training. Despite the international headlines his enlistment generated, Elvis avoided special treatment, determined to show that he was more than just a celebrity. However, the army wasn't without its personal challenges. It was during his time in Germany that Elvis first began to rely heavily on amphetamines, a common practice among soldiers to stay awake and energized. This marked the beginning of a dependency that would follow him for the rest of his life. When Elvis returned to civilian life in 1960, the music landscape had begun to change. Some wondered if his absence would dull his star power, or if newer acts would overshadow him. Yet, his return was nothing short of triumphant. Elvis's first post-Army recording session produced hits like "It's Now or Never" and "Are You Lonesome Tonight?", songs that showcased a more mature, refined sound. These ballads signaled an evolution in his music, marking a departure from the raw rock and roll of his early career. Throughout the 60s, Elvis starred in a string of musical comedies that followed a pretty predictable recipe: a little romance, a lot of singing, and plenty of Elvis charm. Titles like Blue Hawaii and Viva Las Vegas were wildly popular with fans, cementing his status as a silver screen heartthrob. But for every hit, there were forgettable duds like Harem Scarum or Clambake. Critics panned most of his films for being shallow, and even Elvis himself grew tired of the repetitive plots and lack of creative challenge. At one point, he famously remarked, "I'd like to do a good movie, one I could be proud of." Sadly, that wish didn't come true during this phase of his career. Yet, despite his frustrations, these films weren't all bad. They gave us unforgettable moments, like his steamy on-screen chemistry with Anne Margaret in Viva Las Vegas, and iconic songs like "Can't Help Falling in Love." In fact, it's fair to say that Elvis's movies were less about the acting and more about the music. Each film was essentially a vehicle to release new songs, many of which became instant classics. It was a clever strategy, keeping Elvis in the public eye and his music on the charts. But let's not sugarcoat it. The Hollywood years marked a creative decline for Elvis. While he was busy churning out movie after movie, the music world was changing. The British invasion was in full swing, with bands like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones dominating the charts. Rock and roll was evolving, and Elvis was in danger of being left behind. He knew it too. By the mid-60s, he was itching to reclaim his place in the music world, and the result was the famous '68 comeback special. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Before he could reinvent himself, Elvis had to confront some challenges, both professional and personal. The transition from screen to stage wasn't as simple as it might seem. Hollywood had made him a star, but it also boxed him in. Could Elvis break free from the shiny, sanitized image his movies had created? And more importantly, could he reconnect with a world that had started to move on without him? Controversies and criticism, challenges behind the fame. While Elvis Presley's career glittered on the surface, a shadow loomed beneath, casting doubt and complexity on the king of rock and roll's legacy. It's impossible to examine the life of Elvis without delving into the controversies that surrounded him, and these were neither fleeting nor insignificant. From cultural backlash to accusations of appropriation, from his tumultuous personal relationships to his descent into addiction, the controversies surrounding Elvis were as defining as his talent. They reveal a man grappling with fame, societal expectations, and his own inner demons, ultimately painting a picture of an icon who was both extraordinary and deeply flawed. The cultural backlash against Elvis Presley began almost as soon as he stepped onto the national stage in the mid-1950s. His performances, with their signature hip gyrations and uninhibited energy, were nothing short of revolutionary. At a time when post-war America clung to conservative ideals, Elvis represented a direct challenge to the status quo. Teenagers idolized him, while their parents viewed him with suspicion or outright disdain. Critics labeled him lewd and vulgar, claiming his provocative stage presence was a moral threat. One critic memorably described him as a caterwauling hillbilly, while others accused him of corrupting the nation's youth. The backlash wasn't limited to words. When Elvis appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show in 1956, his performance caused such an uproar that the producers decided to film him only from the waist up in future appearances. Ironically, this censorship only added to his allure. By limiting what the audience could see, the controversy amplified the mystique surrounding him. Elvis's fans saw him not just as a performer, but as a symbol of rebellion. His music and persona became a rallying cry for a generation eager to break free from the rigid social norms of their parents' era. Yet, Even as Elvis became a beacon for youthful independence, he remained a polarizing figure. His critics viewed him as a dangerous influence, someone who blurred the lines between respectable behavior and unrestrained hedonism. For every teenager screaming his name, there was a preacher or politician decrying his music as sinful. Churches across America railed against him, and community groups organized record-burning events to denounce his supposed immorality. Despite this, Elvis refused to tone down his act. His defiance only solidified his role as a cultural revolutionary, even as it made him a target for moral outrage. One of the most enduring criticisms of Elvis Presley is his role in the cultural appropriation of African American music. Rock and roll, the genre Elvis came to define, was deeply rooted in the blues, gospel, and rhythm and blues traditions pioneered by black artists. Elvis's meteoric rise to fame brought this music to mainstream audiences, but many argue that he did so at the expense of the black musicians who had long been creating it. Artists like Sister Rosetta Tharpe, Big Mama Thornton, and Chuck Berry laid the groundwork for rock and roll, but it was Elvis who became its most visible face and its wealthiest beneficiary. To his credit, Elvis never denied his debt to black musicians. He openly acknowledged their influence, often citing B.B. King and Mahalia Jackson as inspirations. He was a frequent visitor to Beale Street in Memphis, immersing himself in the vibrant black music scene. Yet, the systemic racism of the music industry meant that while Elvis ascended to unprecedented fame, many of the black artists who inspired him remained in the margins, struggling for recognition and financial security. Big Mama Thornton's original recording of Hound Dog, for instance, enjoyed moderate success, but it was Elvis's version that became a cultural phenomenon. For some, this dynamic makes Elvis complicit in a system that exploited black creativity for the benefit of white artists. However, the story isn't entirely one-sided. Many black musicians viewed Elvis as an ally rather than an appropriator. Little Richard famously said, "Elvis didn't steal rock and roll. He was just so great and so popular that he made it bigger." James Brown and B.B. King, both icons in their own right, spoke of Elvis with respect and admiration, crediting him with breaking down racial barriers in music. Still, the debate over whether Elvis amplified black music or appropriated it remains a contentious issue that continues to color his legacy. Elvis's personal life was no less controversial, and his relationship with Priscilla Beaulieu stands as one of the most scrutinized aspects of his life. Elvis met Priscilla in 1959 while stationed in Germany during his military service. She was only 14 years old, a fact that has drawn significant criticism over the years. Despite the significant age gap, Priscilla's parents approved of the relationship, though under strict conditions. She eventually moved to Graceland at the age of 17, and the couple married in 1967. For Priscilla, life with Elvis was both enchanting and isolating. He had strict expectations for her appearance and behavior, shaping her into what he considered the ideal partner. Over time, these dynamics took a toll on their relationship. Their marriage, while glamorous on the surface, was marked by infidelity, emotional distance, and the pressures of fame. By the early 70s, the couple had grown apart, and they divorced in 1973. Despite the breakup, they remained close, with Priscilla continuing to speak fondly of Elvis in interviews. However, the age gap and power dynamics in their relationship have led to ongoing discussions about control and agency, casting a complicated shadow over their love story. But we'll dive more into that in just a bit. Elvis's struggles with addiction added another layer of controversy to his life. His reliance on prescription drugs began during his time in the military, where amphetamines were commonly used to stay alert. Over the years, this dependency escalated into a full-blown addiction. By the late 60s, Elvis was taking a dangerous mix of stimulants, sedatives, and painkillers to cope with the physical demands of touring and the emotional strain of fame. His drug use took a visible toll on his health, contributing to dramatic weight fluctuations, erratic behavior, and declining performance quality. The people around Elvis often enabled his addiction rather than addressing it. His entourage, known as the Memphis Mafia, was loyal but complicit, rarely challenging him or intervening. Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's notoriously controlling manager, prioritized keeping Elvis on the road and generating revenue over his well-being. The result was a vicious cycle of overwork and self-medication that ultimately contributed to Elvis's tragic decline. Critics within the music industry also took aim at Elvis's career choices, particularly in the 1960s. While artists like the Beatles, Bob Dylan, and Jimi Hendrix were pushing musical boundaries, Elvis seemed stuck in a cycle of formulaic pop songs and lackluster movie soundtracks. Much of this stagnation was the result of Parker's management, which prioritized commercial success over artistic growth. While Elvis longed to record more meaningful music and take on serious acting roles, Parker's tight control over his projects left little room for experimentation. This creative frustration came to a head in the '68 comeback special, where Elvis finally broke free of Parker's influence and reminded the world of his true artistry. But before we talk more about that, we have to talk about Elvis's personal life. And this is the part all the movies are made on. What was it about the superstar's personal life that made people so curious, and still does to this day? Personal struggles, relationships, addiction, and health decline. For all his glittering fame and jaw-dropping success, Elvis Presley's personal life often felt like a storm brewing behind the scenes. To his fans, he was larger than life, the king of rock and roll, a man with the world at his feet. But peel back the layers, and you'd find a deeply human story, one riddled with heartbreak, loneliness, and a slow unraveling. As discussed before, Elvis's marriage to Priscilla was far from a happily ever after. Elvis was increasingly consumed by his career and his reliance on prescription drugs, while Priscilla struggled to carve out her own identity in the shadow of his fame. By the early '70s, the relationship had deteriorated. Both admitted to infidelity, and in 1973, they finalized their divorce. It was a blow for Elvis, who reportedly never stopped loving Priscilla, but the split also reflected the growing chaos in his personal life. Elvis's battle with addiction was another storm that raged largely behind closed doors. The king was first introduced to prescription drugs during his time in the military, where amphetamines were commonly used to boost energy and suppress appetite. Over time, what started as a tool to cope with the rigors of his career became a crutch. By the late '60s and early '70s, Elvis was heavily reliant on a cocktail of pills. The pressures of fame only exacerbated his struggles. Elvis's grueling schedule, combined with his desire to meet the expectations of both his fans and his controlling manager, Colonel Tom Parker, took a toll on his physical and mental health. The drugs helped him keep going, until they didn't. His weight fluctuated dramatically, and his once vibrant performances began to show signs of strain. Behind the scenes, friends and family grew increasingly concerned as Elvis's behavior became more erratic. Graceland, Elvis's sprawling Memphis mansion, became a paradoxical symbol of his life, a place filled with luxury, yet tinged with isolation. While the gates were often surrounded by adoring fans, inside, Elvis lived in a bubble. He surrounded himself with an entourage known as the Memphis Mafia, a group of close friends and associates who shared in his excesses but rarely challenged him. For Elvis, loyalty was paramount, but this loyalty sometimes came at the cost of honest feedback. Few dared to confront him about his spiraling health and dependency issues. By the mid-'70s, the cracks were becoming impossible to ignore. Elvis's performances, once bursting with energy and charisma, began to falter. He struggled to hit the notes that had once come effortlessly, and his physical appearance was a shadow of his former self. The king who had dazzled audiences on The Ed Sullivan Show was now a man grappling with the weight of his own legacy. Yet, even in his darkest moments, Elvis continued to perform. His Las Vegas residencies and nationwide tours were a testament to his work ethic and his unwavering commitment to his fans. But how much longer could the king keep the show going? To understand where this road leads, we need to step into the glitzy, high-stakes world of Las Vegas. The Vegas years. When Elvis Presley first took the stage at the International Hotel in Las Vegas in 1969, it was nothing short of a resurrection. After a decade dominated by formulaic movies and dwindling relevance in the music scene, the '68 comeback special had reignited Elvis's career, proving he still had the magic. Vegas was his next move, a place where legends were made and stars could shine brighter than ever. Elvis's Vegas residency was a spectacle. His first show sold out the massive showroom for weeks, and critics raved about his performance. The king was back, and he wasn't holding anything back. Decked out in his now iconic jumpsuits, designed to dazzle in the bright lights of the Vegas stage, Elvis brought an electrifying mix of old hits and new material to life. Audiences couldn't get enough. The shows were an immediate success, drawing fans from all over the world and re-establishing Elvis as a cultural powerhouse. But Vegas wasn't just a comeback. It was a reinvention. Gone was the slick-haired, clean-cut heartthrob of the '50s. The Vegas Elvis was a larger-than-life showman, his performances blending rock and roll with elements of gospel, soul, and even operatic drama. He was backed by a full orchestra and a powerful vocal group, creating a sound that was as grand as the city itself. Songs like Suspicious Minds and The Wonder of You became staples of his Vegas shows, earning standing ovations night after night. Yet, for all its glitz and glamour, Vegas also came with a price. The relentless schedule, often 2 shows a night, 7 days a week, was grueling. Elvis's health, already fragile, began to deteriorate under the strain. His reliance on prescription drugs deepened, as did his struggles with insomnia and chronic pain. While the stage was a place where he could still command the adoration of his fans, off-stage, Elvis was slipping further into isolation. The demands of Vegas also put a strain on his finances. Despite earning millions, Elvis was hemorrhaging money, thanks in part to Colonel Tom Parker's questionable management practices. Parker negotiated deals that heavily favored the venues and promoters, often at Elvis's expense. Meanwhile, Elvis's lavish lifestyle, complete with private planes, custom cars, and extravagant gifts for his friends and family, left little room for financial stability. By the mid-'70s, the cracks in the Vegas facade were becoming visible. Elvis's performances, once a masterclass in showmanship, began to falter. His voice, though still powerful, struggled to hit the highs of his early years. His movements, once fluid and magnetic, became slower, weighed down by his declining health. Still, the fans came, and Elvis gave everything he had left to the stage. Even in his diminished state, he was a force to be reckoned with, a testament to his enduring charisma and talent. But behind the scenes, Elvis was a man in crisis. His reliance on prescription drugs was no longer a secret, and his weight gain became a cruel topic of public speculation. By the mid-'70s, his weight reportedly fluctuated between 250 and 350 pounds, a far cry from his lean, energetic appearance in earlier years. This drastic change was largely fueled by his reliance on prescription drugs, which included sedatives and stimulants, leading to poor eating habits and reduced physical activity. Elvis often indulged in calorie-laden comfort foods, like peanut butter and banana sandwiches, contributing to his health issues. His weight gain was a tragic reflection of his physical and emotional struggles. The king who had once defied critics and captivated millions now seemed trapped by the very legend he had built. In his final years, Elvis's health spiraled further. He suffered from a host of medical issues, including high blood pressure, liver damage, and an enlarged heart. Yet, even in his last months, he continued to perform, driven by a sense of duty to his fans and an enduring love for the music that had defined his life. Elvis's final Vegas performance in December 1976 was a bittersweet moment. He took the stage one last time, delivering a performance that was as heartfelt as it was haunting. The king was saying goodbye, though no one could have known it at the time. Legacy and aftermath. the king lives on. On August 16, 1977, the world awoke to news that left millions in shock. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, was gone. At just 42 years old, Elvis's untimely death marked the end of an era, but it also signaled the beginning of his immortal legacy. What followed wasn't merely a tribute to a man who had revolutionized music. It was the transformation of Elvis into a cultural icon whose influence would span generations. Elvis's legacy begins, first and foremost, with his music. By the time of his death, Elvis had sold over 500 million records worldwide, a number that has since grown to over 1 billion. He remains the best-selling solo artist in history, a feat few have come close to matching. His catalog, which includes classics like Hound Dog, Suspicious Minds, and Can't Help Falling in Love, is as timeless as ever. It's a testament to his ability to connect with people on a deeply emotional level, whether through the raw energy of his rock hits or the heartfelt vulnerability of his ballads. But what makes Elvis's music truly remarkable isn't just its commercial success, it's the cultural shift it sparked. In the 1950s, popular music was largely segregated, with distinct boundaries between genres like gospel, country, blues, and rhythm and blues. Elvis, with his unique blend of these styles, tore down those barriers. He introduced mainstream audiences to sounds that had long been pioneered by African American artists, bringing them into the spotlight and redefining what music could be. While his role in cultural appropriation remains a topic of debate, there's no denying that Elvis's fusion of influences changed the course of music history. His influence didn't stop with music. Elvis was a fashion icon, a performer who understood the power of image. His hairstyle, flashy jumpsuits, and confident swagger became synonymous with cool, inspiring generations of fans and artists alike. He transformed stagewear into high art, turning every outfit into a symbol of his bold and unapologetic identity. But it was his stage costumes that truly set him apart. Collaborating with designer Bill Ballou, Elvis introduced a series of unforgettable jumpsuits adorned with rhinestones, capes, and intricate embroidery, each more extravagant than the last. These outfits weren't just clothing, they were statements, reflecting his dynamic persona and elevating the concept of stage performance attire. The iconic American Eagle jumpsuit, with its dazzling red, blue, and gold detailing, became synonymous with Elvis's larger-than-life Vegas era. Other designs, like the peacock jumpsuit and caped ensembles, pushed boundaries, blending theatricality with undeniable elegance. Elvis's use of bold colors, metallic fabrics, and unique patterns redefined what male performers could wear, breaking away from traditional, subdued menswear. Even today, traces of Elvis's style can be seen in the worlds of fashion, film, and pop culture, from modern musicians borrowing his stage presence to designers reinterpreting his iconic looks. And then, there's Graceland. Purchased by Elvis in 1957, the sprawling mansion in Memphis, Tennessee, was more than just a home. It was a sanctuary and a symbol of his success. Following his death, Graceland became a shrine, drawing millions of fans from around the world. Today, it stands as one of the most visited homes in the United States, attracting over 600,000 visitors annually. Walking through Graceland is like stepping back in time, with its quirky jungle room, glitzy decor, and the gravesite where Elvis rests alongside his family. For fans, it's a deeply personal way to connect with the man behind the legend. Graceland isn't just a tourist attraction, it's also a business. Managed by Elvis Presley Enterprises, the estate generates millions of dollars each year through tours, merchandise, and licensing deals. From Elvis-themed Christmas ornaments to high-end collectibles, his brand is everywhere. While some fans appreciate how these ventures keep his memory alive, others criticize the commercialization as excessive. After all, Elvis was a man who valued his privacy, and the relentless marketing of his image can feel at odds with the quieter moments of his life. One of the most fascinating and bizarre aspects of Elvis's legacy is the phenomenon of Elvis impersonators. From Las Vegas wedding chapels to international competitions, these tribute artists keep the king's spirit alive in their own unique ways. Some dedicate their lives to perfecting every detail, from his hairstyle to his signature lip curl, while others take a more creative approach, blending Elvis's style with unexpected twists. Whether you love them or cringe at the sight of sequined jumpsuits, there's no denying that impersonators have become a cultural phenomenon in their own right. Elvis's influence extends far beyond the stage. His life and career have inspired countless films, documentaries, and biopics, each exploring different facets of his story. Productions like Elvis and Nixon and the Baz Luhrmann-directed Elvis have reintroduced his life and music to younger generations, sparking renewed interest in his legacy. These portrayals often grapple with the complexities of Elvis's life, painting him as both a trailblazing artist and a flawed human being. They remind us that Elvis wasn't just a superstar. He was a man with dreams, struggles, and vulnerabilities. And what about the conspiracy theories? Decades after his death, some fans remain convinced that Elvis faked his demise and is living in secret. From blurry photographs to supposed sightings, these theories, while outlandish, highlight the deep connection people feel to him. The idea that Elvis might still be alive is less about evidence and more about hope, a way for fans to hold on to the king just a little longer. Elvis's legacy also lives on through his family, particularly his daughter, Lisa Marie Presley. As his only child, Lisa Marie has worked to preserve her father's memory while forging her own path. Her music career, while not as groundbreaking as Elvis, reflects the same passion for storytelling and emotional connection. Lisa Marie's life, marked by high-profile marriages and personal struggles, has kept the Presley name in the spotlight, serving as a reminder that being the child of a legend comes with its own challenges. In recent years, the cultural conversation around Elvis has evolved. While his achievements are celebrated, there is also a growing acknowledgement of the complexities of his legacy. Discussions about his role in cultural appropriation, his struggles with fame, and the darker aspects of his personal life have added depth to our understanding of who he was. Elvis was not just a larger-than-life icon. He was a man shaped by the pressures of his time, navigating a path that was as groundbreaking as it was tumultuous. So what is it about Elvis Presley that keeps us coming back? Is it his music, which still feels as fresh and powerful as it did when it first hit the airwaves? Is it his story, a tale of humble beginnings, meteoric rise, and tragic downfall that resonates on a universal level? Or is it something deeper, an intangible quality that made Elvis more than just a man, but a symbol of hope, rebellion, and the enduring power of art? Elvis Presley may have left the building, but his spirit lingers in every note of his music, every visit to Graceland, and every impersonator who dons a jumpsuit in his honor. His story reminds us that legends never truly die. They live on in the hearts and minds of those they inspire. And as long as there are people who love music, who believe in the transformative power of art, Elvis will remain the king, a timeless icon whose legacy will echo through the ages. Elvis Presley's life was full of big wins and tough challenges, but his impact on music and culture is unforgettable. From his amazing performances to the controversies in his life, he's still a legend. What part of Elvis's story do you find most interesting? Share in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this.